Please give a warm welcome to Rebecca Makkai and Lindsay Hunter.
Rebecca.
Lindsay.
Who's watching your kids right now?
They're actually here.
Oh, okay. There's a recurring theme throughout the book where Bodhi is asked over and over and over again who's watching her kids.
Yes.
And I wanted to ask you, as a female writer, if that's something you're asked over and over and over again.
Absolutely. Are you asked that?
All the time.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's sort of what's interesting about it is that question often comes from women.
Interesting,
of
really?
Maybe a generation up. I don't know. I think part of it, it's kind of I think the implicit undertone of that is, I wouldn't have been able to do this, why are you?
Yes, totally. How did you do it?
Yeah.
Why are you doing it?
And maybe just concern that I might have left them at an orphanage and forgotten.
Next time that happens, I want you to go, oh my God, oh no.
Well, the next time it happens, I hope it's someone who's just bought my book, and then I just can just smile and nod, and then they'll get home, and then like a month later, they'll go, oh.
I am that person.
Yeah.
No, I feel like I have those impulses too, to ask something that I don't want to be asked. Like asking another writer, like, what are you working on? It's just devastating for another writer to hear, but it's like, I want to know because I'm scared.
Yeah. You want to, it's partly just what else, it's a way of starting a conversation.
Totally.
That's something.
And like, do I need to be jealous of you?
Right. And the answer is always yes. You
I think every writer's jealous of you, Rebecca Makkai.
I'm not sure about that, but thank you.
This is like a wonderful moment in your career. This is a wonderful moment for people from Chicago, I would say. We are so proud and excited.
Thank you.
Like, we're so proud that Rebecca Makkai is a Chicago writer, and like, I saw her once, and she was nice, and she was glowing. And now all of you can say that. So Javier mentioned some things that we're supposed to talk about, and I'm shocked because we're not going to talk about any of that stuff. But I guess I can work some of it in. I want to talk to you about where this book started for you. Was it something you were working on when you were finishing up Great Believers? Was it something that came after? Did it start with Bodhi? Where did it start for you?
Yeah. So, there are a lot of writers who start with character. I don't. I start with plot, and I start with setting. And then I sort of reverse engineer my perfect victim.
What?
In terms of a protagonist.
Wow.
Yeah. That sounds psychopathic, but meaning I start with plot, and then I need to sit back and go, okay, who is the character who would be the most changed by these circumstances, who would be the most vulnerable to these circumstances? Who would that person be? What would be going on in their lives? What would their Achilles heel be? And then the character comes from that. So I start, in terms of place, definitely started with wanting to write about a boarding school, which we can get into maybe, and also started with wanting to write about essentially the world's worst high school reunion, which is now, if anyone started the book, just wait, it's coming. The last quarter of the book is basically these people kind of forced together, having to relive a lot of this stuff. And that was originally the whole book. That was what I wanted to write.
Really? Wow.
So I wanted, so the setting and the plot part, and then character comes later for me.
So when you say you start there, are you writing that stuff?
No.
Okay.
So I have a couple of years, usually, of thinking about a book before I start typing. And I'm really careful to distinguish between writing and typing, because I feel like with my students, they're always like, hey, I didn't get any writing done. Like this whole past month, I outlined and I made a map and I went to Zimbabwe for research. And then I interviewed people and then I thought about, but anyway, I didn't get any writing done. Okay. So you didn't get any typing done is what you mean.
Yeah.
But no, so I I spend, like a couple of years thinking, I call it like, I think of it as like a marination phase. And then when I actually start typing, it goes pretty fast.
Wow. And so you're not doing anything active. You're not like...
I'll jot some notes down.
Wow.
Yeah, sometimes I'll be doing research. But often, I mean, the thing is, in that time, I have 2 or 3 or 4 competing ideas. So it's a matter of which one just kind of gets the heaviest and rolls downhill.
Has any of those other competing ideas ever become a book after?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So this one was, competing with The Great Believers when I ended up writing The Great Believers.
Wow.
And then this was kind of waiting in the wings.
And she was just like buzzing, like
Yeah.
in the background.
Yeah.
So you think to yourself, whose life can I ruin?
In terms of finding a protagonist?
Yeah.
Kind of.
Yeah.
Not, your job is not always to make things hard for the protagonist, right? But it's more about who would be the most malleable, right? So you can look at, you look at Hamlet and you go, okay, what if the plot of Hamlet happened to Prince Hal from another Shakespeare play, right? Who's very swashbuckling and sure of himself. The plot of Hamlet does not really affect him. He just goes and stabs the guy and it's done.
Can they steal this idea?
Of Prince Hal being in the plot of Hamlet,
Yeah.
please, someone
Okay.
write that, yes.
One of you, I want to hear from you when this is finished.
We should like a whole Shakespeare, just like Ophelia in the plot of Macbeth. We could do a whole
Yes.
thing. Yeah.
Everybody who takes that idea owes Rebecca $20.
Only when it sells.
So you were saying it started out as this reunion,
Yeah.
but so there wasn't this sort of overarching mystery.
There was.
Okay.
Was. Here's what it is. So, basic subject of the book is this woman, she's 40, she is brought back to the boarding school she attended. She's going to teach a 2-week class. She's a film historian and a podcaster, and she's teaching a podcasting class, and one of her students decides to do a podcast on the death of someone that Bodhi knew in high school. Someone's in prison for it. This student believes it's the wrong guy. So that's 3/4 of the book. And then the last quarter is, and I don't think this is too much of a spoiler, we're 4 years in the future, and we're at a hearing for a retrial. There's the possibility of a retrial for this guy. So the whole book was originally these people who have to stay in the same hotel because if you're a witness and you're brought in from out of state, they have to put you up. And all these people would be out of state because it was a boarding school. They don't live there. They never lived there. And now they are trapped together in a hotel, and they have to deal with each other. And that still is the last part of the book, but that was originally the whole book. And then I had such a hard time getting all the backstory that I needed in there, because I needed not only to tell you what had happened in 1995, but to tell you what had happened to bring us to this point of getting to hoping for a retrial. And that was that chapter 2, back up the dump truck and just unload the entire backstory on people. But it was going to be a 75-page chapter 2, and I went back.
I feel like you just read me in front of all these people, and I'm uncomfortable. Also, let's take a moment of silence for if I had written the book that was set at a hotel and you're with all your high school friends, it would be a porn.
I would read that by you.
Thank you. Thank you. It would be literary-ish. But I think it points to something I've been thinking about as I've been thinking about your work as a whole, in that I think of you as this incredibly literary and talented writer, someone that I love at the sentence level, but someone who's also incredibly capable and confident and powerful in writing all these different characters, bringing them all together, having, this current moment weaved through, the plot, having this boarding school mystery. How are you this capable? Have you always? Do you feel more capable as a writer now than you did at the start?
Yeah, for sure. No, definitely. You know, my first novel, it took me 10 years, which is not unusual for a first novel, for one thing. But like the only outline I ever did was a pie chart that was just different kind of
bless your
percentages
heart.
And so this is why it took me 10 years, because I was like, I just had sections that I didn't know how they went together, and
Is it a pizza? Is it an apple pie?
Yeah, no,
I don't
exactly.
know.
And then it, did the thing every writer does and sent it way too early out to agents, and then, got this like, oh, let me read it. And then, so the whole middle of the book doesn't really work. And just, try to, basically problem solve and figure that out. And it's an object lesson, and that taught me a lot about what I needed to do going forward. So no, yeah, it's not that you're, we both have friends who write, say, like a mystery series or a romance series where the point is to do the same thing again and again and make it brilliant every time. And I'm so in awe of those people. And what you and I both do.
Don't
is,
even. Okay. There's a whole table with 2 mugs on it between us. Okay.
But no. You're going to agree with us. What you and I both do is try to write something really different every time. And so in that vein of writing, you're never going to feel like you already know how to write this book. It's always this completely new challenge. But what I know better with each one is my own process. And I'm better at calling myself out when I do the same, like make the same ridiculous excuses or make the same mistakes, be like, oh, that's that thing you do. Yeah, that's not going to work this time. So, I mean, it doesn't get necessarily, I think it does get easier. It's not that the book is easier, it's not that the problems are easier, but I have my own number.
I mean, because you've mentioned that it took you 4 or 5 years, depending on how you count, to write this book. And are you including that time that you were writing in terms of imagining and thinking? You're talking about the typing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Typing the first words through copy edits.
Okay.
Yeah.
So how do you harness this massive of a situation as you're typing? I've never written a book, so this is I'm really asking because I need to know.
I mean, yeah, there's outlining. There's a lot of like retroactive outlining. There's a lot of putting stuff all over the office floor. There's a lot of drawing out plot arcs. There's a lot of,
And as you're laying it out on the floor and drawing and Post-its and whatever, are you Instagramming that?
Sometimes.
Because that is worth it right then and there. Right?
Just the clicks, yeah.
It is. It's like, look what I'm doing something over here.
I'm really in awe of the people who actually have the wall that looks like the serial killer wall with like red string between every note card, and it's all, yeah.
I know. I think I could do that, and then I would go, what?
Yeah.
What is this?
I feel like you do it when you need to. So you do it when you're stuck. And if you never get stuck, you don't need to.
Right.
But when you are stuck, instead of telling yourself that you have writer's block or that you're a bad writer or that it's a bad book, what you do when you're stuck is you outline.
Right.
And you do more like left brain thinking. Because if you're already in critical mode, you might as well use that to your advantage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there anything that still scares you as you're going?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, every novel has like a cosmic impossibility at its heart. There's for every novel, there's just something where you're like, this is not going to work as a novel, or this is the lie that this fiction has to tell in order to work, and I don't like it. Or, in general, my MO is rather than try to ignore that or avoid it or solve it, to just write about it. So like for this book, just the problem of memory was huge for me for a long time. You have someone in 2018 looking back on 1995, and how does she get the backstory and how does she get that across? I didn't want to jump there, if only because I'd done that in The Great Believers, and I didn't want to repeat myself. I didn't want to be going back and forth. And I didn't want to do this thing that sometimes bugs me in fiction, where it's a very cinematic technique of someone remembering something, but what they remember is 5 pages long in full chronological order with great detail. And it's like the air smelled like almonds. Like, you don't remember that? So instead of doing either of those, I made the book really thematically about the problem of memory and its fallibilities and how inaccurate our memory can be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and one of the most brilliant parts of the book is for me, all along I'm thinking, is Bodhi really telling me the truth here?
Mm-hmm.
And that's even true of things that she's thinking about in the present.
Yeah.
How did you inhabit that kind of mind space where, she's being as honest as she can, but
Yeah.
we're still seeing a little bit of...
I like the way you phrased that, because I think I've been asked a lot about her as an unreliable narrator, which implies that she's lying.
Right.
And she isn't.
Right.
I really feel like she never lies in this book. She's very open about what she's not able to remember and about going, I wonder if I had a subconscious motivation here. I don't really know. I think she's a over-the-top reliable narrator, which then brings a lot into question, because instead of just confidently telling you stuff, she's questioning herself, which is more honest than confidently telling you stuff.
Right.
But it raises that question.
Yeah, there's like this discomfort because she had this perception of herself as a teenager that was extreme and that maybe lots of other people didn't have of her.
Yeah.
And so she's remembering all of that, she's processing all of that, but then she's also in the present trying to figure it all out.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is any of us, like, you start comparing notes at a high school reunion, or you actually look back at your yearbook or whatever it is and you go, oh, I completely forgot about that, or I remembered this completely differently than this other person. And we don't know what version is accurate. We have no idea.
No one can know, and everyone's version is different.
Right, and everyone's version is right because they are sure that it happened that way.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. You did mention, and I think you were trying to circumvent anyone asking you, like, so there was someone that died in your high school, and like in your Bodhi, and let's talk about that. And but you did mention that there was an underwear thief at your high school.
There was an underwear thief at my high school.
Has anyone come forward?
Oh no, we know who it was. So I was a day student at a boarding school.
Oh my goodness.
And there was a young woman who was, in this case, I believe she was kicked out. The underwear thief in the novel is not.
She was kicked out for stealing
well,
underwear?
it was multiple things, including underwear.
Okay, what else?
From someone's brother's dog tags, like army dogs. It was like really personal stuff.
Okay.
And yeah, she was kicked out. It was sort of the scandal of my freshman year. This girl in the dorm, and we all just...
and that girl is Gillian Flynn.
Yes. Yes.
So she's fine. You can see why. You just have to read her, and you're like, oh.
Yeah. Makes total sense.
I get it.
Yeah.
One of the most delightful stories in the book is the story about the student who didn't understand fireflies.
Yes.
Can you read that to us?
I can read that to you. Why, thank you for randomly asking me to read that. I think I can
just out of
completely
nowhere.
flip to it at random.
You might have it dog-eared. I don't know.
So I'm going to fill you, this is the one thing I'm going to read tonight. I'm going to fill you in a little bit. This is a first-person novel, but it's also a second-person novel. And the you is this music teacher named Mr. Block, who Bodhi, the protagonist, remembers very fondly. But as she goes back to the school and she thinks back, is starting to remember all the rumors that circled around him and Thalia. Thalia is the girl who was murdered their senior year. She was found dead in the swimming pool, and someone's in prison for that, but there's a lot of question about that, and Bodhi's really rethinking this. And then Follies is, I never really explain what it is, so you can just imagine, but it's some kind of musical review that they're all practicing.
Yeah, there's no theater nerds in this room.
No, never, none. I thought of the Follies rehearsal senior year when we were all called out of the theater by Bent Jensen, our Danish exchange student. You might not remember Bent, who was only there 1 year. The reason I remember him myself is that he was gorgeous, an unquestioned fact, a swoop of blonde hair that looked drawn on, a chin cleft. Bent was late to rehearsal that night, and when you asked why, he'd stood there, embarrassed and wide-eyed, and explained that he didn't quite know how to say, but there were lots of little UFOs outside. And as soon as the words were out, he reddened, but everyone was ready to believe him, already out of their seats, already jumping off the stage. You calling after us with fake upset that masked your real upset. We tumbled outside and stood on the steps, on the sidewalk below, staring out at the empty hill behind the theater, the one where the off-season baseball boys would play wiffle ball. It was still the tail end of summer, but late enough that full New Hampshire dark had descended. There were, Bent said, and he seemed to try unsuccessfully to laugh at himself. There were 100 little, I don't know what, there. And he pointed in triumph to the sudden illumination of dozens of tiny flickering lights at the forest's edge. Dude, someone said, you've never seen fireflies? Apparently he hadn't. Poor Bent had never even heard of them, was completely new to the idea that a living thing could illuminate like that. I remember in the hilarity that followed, thinking that I understood, that my God, if you'd never known something like this existed, yes, your mind would jump to the nearest, strangest, most terrifying associations. They light up to attract mates, someone said, and explained that what we were seeing was essentially a firefly nightclub. We ran around until we caught a few that we could show Bent up close. Max Crammon smashed one on the sidewalk and spread the glow with his sneaker as we all screamed at him to stop. We filed back in to find you still at the piano, which Thalia leaned on like a torch singer. She alone had stayed back. Carlotta was in Follies that year, singing Adelaide's Lament in a campy New York accent, undercut by the Virginia one she couldn't shake. She whispered before I went back up to the booth, someone was doing a mating dance of her own. Back in the dorm later, the story stretched to include, had we seen it or not, the details of your cheeks burning red, you wiping at your neck as if to rub lipstick off. If we believed at all that you returned her affections, why didn't we tell some adult? The truth is that even if you'd kissed Thalia right there in rehearsal, it never would have occurred to us to say something. Just like we never would have turned in Ronan Murphy for having more coke in his room than a Colombian drug lord. Not because we were honor-bound, but because it seemed like just one of the many secrets of the world to which we were now privy, secrets we were supposed to be cool about. And because maybe we knew on some level that our assumptions would melt away under examination. When I still taught at UCLA, I used the Firefly story in lectures as an example of the uncanny valley, although I have to admit it's a terrible one. Sometimes I used it to illustrate the way our brains fill gaps, the way we use what logic and references we have. Sometimes it was about false assumptions. It wasn't lost on me, although I never included this detail, that Carlotta and I had done the same thing, looking at you and Thalia and filling in the lurid details that would make the best story later. We thought we knew, and so we became certain we knew. It became as real to us as those lightning bugs, their mating dance at the tree line, our laughter, Bent's good-humored relief, our feet hitting the earth as we raced to catch them for him, bringing him miracles in our cupped hands.
Just awful.
Yeah, I know. Thanks.
That's what I mean about the sentence level, and also that you're establishing what it means to be in a child's mindset, and to also be, so hungry to be eye level with an authority that you would overlook these things that are wrong.
Yeah.
I have to say that when I first started reading the book, the you comes to you very early, and I felt indicted by it because I love true crime podcasts. I love true crime, and I know how problematic that is, and I felt that I was being included in the you in the very beginning, and I wondered if you wanted that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, especially at the point where we settled on the title, that was a really specific choice because, you know, the reader picking this book up does not yet know about the existence of this music teacher, right? The reader picking this up, you is you. And it definitely, this is a book that's really aware of the tropes that it's partaking in, the tropes that it's subverting. It is, you know, simultaneously a critique of the way we consume true crime, and in some ways participating in the genre. The funny thing is, like, I did not write true crime, I wrote fictional crime, very specifically, but it is still very much a part of that kind of storytelling. It's complicated, right? There's, you know, this book is pointing out a lot of things, a lot of the harm that true crime medium stuff does, but it's also pointing out some of the good that it does. We do have cases that have gotten solved or wrongful exonerations that have been righted because of public interest in a case, like the West Memphis 3 or Adnan Syed. Like, these things happen because of public interest. Like, where we direct our public interest is a whole other thing. So the book is about all of that. And you know, I'm directing it myself too, certainly. I'm someone who, I just spent a lot of yesterday and today watching the new Murdaugh, South Carolina thing on Netflix.
All right. Should we sidebar? If you're not familiar with the Murdaugh murder
Oh my God.
situation in South Carolina,
Yeah.
hit Rebecca up on Twitter in her DMs, and she'll give you a full rundown.
Right?
So you are in the true crime fan verse.
Yeah, I mean, I
Okay.
think I find there's certain versions of that are really problematic, where it's treated just as entertainment, where people who were people of interest in a case end up getting harassed, where victims' families are traumatized, and there are versions of it where, you know, people are able to identify Jane Does from 1973 because some podcast happens and they put pictures online, or they get people to submit familial DNA. So there's this huge scope. And the thing is, as an author, when you find this mucky tar pit of contradictions, that's probably where you want to be.
I love that.
I mean, yeah.
So that's what it gives you. In other words, that's the itch it's scratching.
Yeah, like it, you know.
So I'm not a freak.
You are not a freak.
Thank you.
Personally, except in the good way. But no, I mean, first of all, I think all of us, you know, the interest in true crime is nothing new, right? Like they literally sold souvenirs outside the Lindbergh baby kidnap trial in the 1920s. Podcasting is new, and so that's a new form. But we all grew up on like Unsolved Mysteries and America's Most Wanted and Dateline, and I think there's more like open conversation right now about why we're interested in what we're interested in. But I also think it's evolutionary. I think there's something really, like, millions of years of human history, someone died, and you probably should figure out why. Like, that guy's lying dead by that berry bush with those berries in his mouth. I should figure out what happened so I don't make the same mistake as Grog. So it's you know, it's like this natural impulse. I've noticed this is very odd, but if someone I know passed away and there's an obituary and everything, and believe me, I'm the issue you're going to have with what I'm saying, I'll get there. But if they have the obituary and they don't give the cause of death, I'm very upset. Just on this weird level. And then I think it through and I go, okay, there are so many reasons why they wouldn't. There are all kinds of privacy things, just, you know, infinite reasons why you don't want to put that out there, depending, right? But there's something in me that's like panicked, like I need to know. And I think that is very tied into the same impulse that drives us to true crime, of like, I need to know what went wrong so that I don't make the same mistake, as if you could avoid things, right? I mean, some things you could, like don't date the guy who's gonna throw stuff at your head, right? Like there is that, which is a genuine benefit of some of the true crime media, honestly.
Yes.
To be like the Murdaugh thing,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
But it's also, you know, in many other cases, it's like, well, no one, you know, you can't victim blame. You can't victim blame ever, but no one could have possibly avoided this. There's just that instinct, right or wrong, logical or not, ethical or not. We just have that instinct.
It's the most human instinct
Yeah,
there is. What
yeah.
happened? I need to know everything. Exactly like that. So I can avoid riding my bike down that dead end road or whatever.
Yeah. I won't go trick-or-treating at that one house.
Right,
Like,
right,
That's going to
exactly.
save me, right.
How did you get hooked up with podcast favorite darling Paul Holes?
Oh my God, right. So you read my acknowledgments.
I did.
So anyway, if you don't know who Paul Holes is, he's a really kind of OG cold case investigator. He solved the Golden State Killer case. Here's what happened. I was doing a completely different event online for Anderson Books in Naperville. And I was waiting in the green room. It's like an anthology I was in, the Zoom green room. And they announced the upcoming events. And one of them was, we will have Paul Holes here for his memoir in April. And just in the little Zoom, the chat with the organizers, I went, oh my God, Paul Holes. And she writes back and she goes, do you want to moderate? We're looking for a moderator. And I went, yes. So I interviewed him on stage in Naperville just this past spring. So the book was written, but I was still in this fact-checking, copy editing phase. And so we had a lovely time backstage, and then I was like, can I ask you questions about blood spatter?
And he was like,
He was like, yes. No, he was
excited?
like such a, yes. He was like,
Oh my
please.
gosh.
And then, so we talked a little bit, and he was like, just email me more. So we emailed.
what is
and-
Paul Holes' email address?
No. One of the really interesting things was in the signing line, because we kind of signed together afterwards, people handing him thick manila envelopes.
Of like
Case
evidence?
files? I don't know. Because they were handing him all kinds of stuff that he probably wasn't going to take home, because he's in the middle of a tour and people were giving him like literal jigsaw puzzles and things. But he kept all the whiskey and he kept...
That is a great detail.
I know.
Thank you.
And then he kept all these envelopes, and he's like, there are probably people asking me to look into a case, and it could be important. You never know. And it could also be someone like, I think my next door neighbor is this renowned serial killer, and here's all my evidence. Like, he's not going to throw that away. So he left with like this stack of stuff.
You got to follow up.
I know.
Any of that pan out? Underwear thief solved?
Yeah.
Oh, we already solved it.
No, we solved it.
We solved it.
We just
That's
don't
right.
know what she's up to now.
Right.
Besides writing Gone Girl, because that okay.
She's a little busy. I want to talk about when you drop the U. And this is a little bit of a spoiler, but get over it. There's a very powerful final sentence to Mr. Block. And then the book isn't over. There's still another few pages left. Very beautiful and ruminative writing. And I wanted to ask you your thought process of how, dropping the U and then still going on with the book.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily that I definitively drop it. And the thing with the U, it's not epistolary. She's not writing this to him.
Right.
It's that feeling, if you get that feeling, especially if you like revisit a place you haven't been in years, and you just feel like a certain person is watching you. Not in a creepy way, just like this person is the person who's looking over my shoulder, and they can see everything I'm doing. She steps back onto campus, and she says, she's not entirely sure why at first, but the person that she pictures watching her is this music teacher. And so he's the person she's kind of just thinking this all at. And you're right, there's a sort of I needed to bring that part of the book to a really specific conclusion and a really specific statement. And then to continue, and it's not necessarily that now he's not the one listening, right? But she never says the word you again. I think she kind of excised that in some ways, maybe, right? By talking to him. And then he's maybe not so much in her mind in the end as external to her finally, and something that she might still have to deal with, but not. And just, there are the people who live in our heads. He's just one of the people who lives in her head. And maybe by the end, he's not as much.
Or she has a handle on her rage, maybe.
Yeah.
She's more clearly directing it in a way.
Right. And the reason, early on, it's for very subconscious reasons that he's one of the voices in her head. She knows something was wrong, but she just hasn't really thought about it. And that becomes clearer and clearer the farther we go, until she really actually, takes action in a very specific way that I'll just leave incredibly vague.
In a shocking, wonderful way. Yeah. You strike me as someone who loves doing research.
Yeah.
And just it goes along with my whole speech about your capability. What was the research like for this project?
Right. So the boarding school thing, I didn't need to do much research on. I had that experience. I actually, as an adult, I live on the campus of the boarding school where my husband teaches, and I have for 21 years. And so it's a world that I know really, really well. And also, in addition, honestly, it's just a lot of, as a writer, boarding schools along with colleges bring you in as a visiting writer. So I've gotten to see, especially some of these East Coast, really old boarding schools up close. I didn't need research there. I needed research on the New Hampshire legal system and the New Hampshire carceral system, which I largely got from the same person, this incredible public defender in New Hampshire. And then I needed research on rowing crew, because I don't know how to do that. And, other little things. There's some, I'll leave this vague, but some emergency medicine stuff. And then the murder scene things, right, with people like Paul Holes helping me out. The main thing really was the legal stuff, because legal stuff, we all think we know how a court of law works, and unless you're a lawyer, you really don't. And among other things, just the idea that it would be, that it would be really easy to get a retrial if new evidence comes up, which is like, I'm talking to like the best public defender in New Hampshire, and she basically was the only person in the past 100 years in New Hampshire to get to the point of even getting a hearing for a potential retrial. Like, it just doesn't happen. And so, that I wanted, I did not want the Perry Mason version. I really wanted a lot of the project of this book is to say, okay, let's look at the kind of case that does capture the public imagination, for better or worse, because there are other cases that should, there are cases that shouldn't, but let's take that case of the young, beautiful, wealthy girl, and let's look at it through a hyper-realist lens. Like, what does that mean for the family? What does that mean for the actual witnesses? And the underbelly of all of this so often is wrongful incarceration, which disproportionately affects Black men, and then we get into that whole world. So it's the last thing I wanted to do. I still want it to be a satisfying mystery in that we got a dead person at the beginning, and by the end we know who did it. But unsatisfying in some others because we're not in Perry Mason land.
I thought that was a really bold decision that you made. Did you struggle with not providing that kind of satisfaction?
Right, because, well, it's like the same people who are sad that I didn't put a happy ending on The Great Believers.
You know who you are.
It's like, well, I could have, but
this is literature.
Well, right, and it's also like that's not the way most of these stories turned out, and do we really, it would have made a more satisfying reading experience, but that's not really what you want. I don't think. I don't know, maybe you do. And in this case, yeah, it's like, I'm just, if I wanted to write something that was simply going to make you happy, it would have nothing to do with this book at all.
Go see Gillian Flynn, okay? I mean, come on. Just kidding. You wrote some of this during the pandemic.
A whole lot of it.
Lot of it. What did that do to your process? Did anything change for you?
I mean, I think it did bring, I was within the paperback year of The Great Believers, and I was still traveling a ton. So it was kind of this hard wall on like, yeah, guess what, you're staying home forever.
Yeah.
That spring was hard because we were all trying to homeschool, which that didn't work out for anybody.
Continue.
No. But then, I was home more, and I eventually could do more. I ended up I had residencies canceled, but I ended up just house sitting. That worked out pretty well. The pandemic is a small part of the book.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of the book. So the last quarter of the book is set in March of 2022, which was a funny, I put it there because I was like, well, I'll set it in March of 2022 when the pandemic will surely be over. And then it was getting closer, and I was like, I had to go through and put face masks on everybody and change all of my sentences from like, she smiled to like, she seemed to smile.
So you were writing those scenes in 2020?
Well, it was more like 2021.
Okay.
Right? Late 21. And then we actually got to spring of 22, and New Hampshire lifted its mask mandate.
Oh, wow.
So then I went in and took some masks off some people, but not off of other people. That was really fun.
Wow. In my mind, I was like, okay, obviously she wrote like the first half of it in 2018.
Yeah.
And then the pandemic happened, and she's like, I got to pick this crap up again.
Yeah.
And start it over. But no, you didn't.
No.
It's very shocking because you did the exact opposite,
Yeah.
it seems.
No, I started it in 2019. So I was writing, back a year. I don't think I had a date on it yet at that point. And then, was kind of projecting forward into the I'll just put it after this is all completely, in 2020, in 2021. I'll just set it in 2022. And then it's just a few sentences. It is not a book about the pandemic. No. But there were some fascinating things in there that I learned from this lawyer in New Hampshire, in court, if you're going to testify during the mask mandate, they wanted to still be able to see your face. So they made you wear a plastic shield instead, so they could see your mouth to tell if you were lying, I guess.
The old mouth trick.
Right?
That's why you talk out of your mouth like this.
I think it's supposed to be when you cover your mouth that means you're lying. And so maybe they
I
felt
wasn't there.
Right? Maybe they felt like the face mask
Everyone's
was doing the same thing.
Right.
I don't know. Yeah.
Right.
So I just I have to include that. That's too good to leave out.
I mean, I feel like there's been so many conversations with writers of I want to write about the pandemic, but is it okay to write about the pandemic? And you weren't writing about the pandemic like you said. It's just
but it's a little bit, yeah.
And it feels because I feel like there's a lot of books that have come out that are set during the same time, but they don't mention it at all. It's just sort of we're in a fictional world now.
TV shows too.
Yes. Same.
Yeah. Well, especially on TV, I can understand because you hire the world's most gorgeous human beings to be on your TV show, and you cover half their face, and you make it You
just have to pay them half.
Yeah, well, true. Yeah. And you could actually do a voiceover. You get a better actor to just dub in the voice. That'd be great. Just get a
Antonio
model.
Banderas does
Right.
Penn Badgley's voice.
Right. Hey, Penn Badgley's a good actor.
He is, and he has a great voice.
Yes, yeah. Speaking of we won't get into this, but speaking of second person, yeah, exactly.
Yes.
exactly.
Well, let's talk about second person.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of were,
We
but
did.
that's
We did it.
But that as a TV show, that I kind of, I'm going to narrate this whole thing to a second person, even though I'm kind of definitely not writing it down. Kind of the same vibe.
And they changed the you this season.
Yeah.
This is now about you, the TV show.
This is now a Penn Badgley fan club meeting.
We're done with
Sorry.
You on Twitter are a delight.
Thank you.
And you're always telling stories and telling your followers, fun things that you've learned, fun facts that you've learned. You're like a fun fact machine. Uh-huh. What's your current favorite fun fact?
Ooh. Okay. I'm not sure about current, but I can tell you my favorite go-to fun fact, which you could do as a fun fact or you could do as a trivia question. I'm not going to make you do trivia. I'm just going to tell you.
Well, you don't think I'm smart?
Well, I do. I just think that okay, do you want me to do it as a trivia question?
No.
Okay. I'm just going to tell you all right. So the way you do as a trivia question is to ask this a question, but the world's largest manufacturer of tires is Lego.
What?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
All those little.
All the millions of tiny little things. So you ask someone who's the world's largest tire manufacturer.
You're like Goodyear.
Yeah, Michelin, Goodyear, Firestone, whatever. It's Lego.
That's how many of those little. I mean, I have probably 3/4 of the world's population of tires in my home.
Right. It's like how many tires do I own? 8 in my family.
Right.
How many Lego tires are somewhere in my basement?
Thousands.
Yes. Yes.
And none of them fit the little car that we're trying to play with. But everybody loves you, Lego. Everybody loves you. Another thing I really appreciate about you is that you love to bring people together.
I do.
You love to bring like disparate people together, and I've met so many different kinds of people just being in your presence.
Aw, thanks.
What's that about?
Aw.
Tell me how to be a person.
I'm an extrovert. I really like being around people. And I think a lot of writers are introverts, and I get it. That's a logical job choice. And for me, as an extrovert, if I'm alone all day writing, then I need, the antidote to that is maybe to go on Twitter and talk to a million people, or it's to have a dinner party or to throw a thing in the city. And I also, honestly, this is very funny, but when I was 11, the only magazine that my allergist's office had was the New Yorker or Highlights, and I was too old for Highlights. So I would read the New Yorker. And
that explains so much.
Oh, no. Okay. But then so then I was 11 or 12. I was somewhere in that zone, and I was reading an article about some lady, and I have no idea who this was.
This poor lady.
And it was this lovely thing about this woman in New York who loved to bring people together. And I think she died maybe, but it was they were interviewing other people about how they'd met each other through this woman, and she was just a connector. And I thought that was so cool. And I never intentionally set out to be I'm gonna do that too, and that's good. It was that sounds like fun. And I think that just soaked deep in, along with the allergy shots that I was getting. And someday I should find what article this was, but there was
that
something
woman
there
was Gillian Flynn.
Right. She was
May she rest
only
in
also
peace.
probably, she was probably 12 at the time. I don't think she's that much older than me.
What would you like? This is my last question for you before we turn it out to the
Yeah.
audience. So everybody get ready, okay? And no, none of these, this is a story, not a question. But this is a story and not a question, Rebecca.
Yes, yeah.
Just kidding, this is a question. What do you want people to get from this book? What would be your dream? It could be a sentence.
Okay, so I got this amazing Facebook message today from someone I know that she just read the book, and she said, I'm sitting here and all the little shards of my adolescence are emerging from my body. Ejecting, I can't remember what she said, but she felt like, and I think that's it for me too. This was about exercising the ghosts of the 90s in a lot of ways, of adolescence, of negative sexist culture, a lot of things. And I did a lot of, although this is not about me and it's not about my high school, except for the underwear thief, Gillian Flynn, it was still very much about being in that mindset and thinking back on better or worse. It's not all negative. And there are many things I would hope someone would take from this. I'd hope that they would think about wrongful incarceration. I hope that they would think about the legal system, the carceral system, all those things. But I would also just hope that it would kind of send people back in a cathartic way to their own high school experience, and to question or re-question some of what they put up with, some of what they participated in, because that's part of the book too, right? And I was living in that headspace for 5 years writing it. And the headspace that I live in is essentially the one that I want a reader to live in. just for maybe not 5 years, because hopefully it's a long book, but it should not take you 5 years to read.
No judgment. Thank you so much. I want to hear some great questions from the audience now.
Okay, and the thing is, we got a first question. Okay.
So one of the delights for me in reading The Great Believers was coming across a passage that said in the coffee shop, it's like, I remember Rebecca posting about this whole exchange on Facebook about the girl who really should be breaking up with the guy. I'm wondering if there's anything like that in this book, or maybe someday we're going to see one of your Zillow finds in a book.
It's funny, I don't tend to write much at all from real life, except sometimes in random details. And there are, especially in this book, I was very careful, other than the underwear thief, to it's not so much even disguising a detail as a certain real life detail would just suggest the possibility of a different detail to me. So I knew a guy who was a certain way. I'm not going to write that, but it makes me think of a guy who could be this way. And the only reason that anyone I knew or know recognizing themselves in this would be that I bent so far over backwards to avoid that I came 360 by accident. Came around to a different person. I find writing from real life to be very limiting. And I'll be very vague, I'm sorry about this, but the book that I'm working on next, it's the first time that I've done a book that's based on the life of a real historical person. And
Gillian Flynn.
I'm
sorry that I spoiled that.
And it is giving me fits because it's like, well, I can't have this person do whatever I want. And like, they actually did certain things and then I don't know why they did them. So I just don't tend to write from real life. But there's the occasional detail, and it's very often the kind of thing that like one or two people would go, wait, I know where that's from. But this one I was really careful. I think there's one high school friend who I messaged, and I was like, there are a few things that only you would know where they came from.
Hi, great shoes, both of you.
Right? Look at those. Those are so cool.
Both
I'm from Florida.
Where'd you get them? That's not the question. Rebecca, too, thank you so much for doing the legal research, because as a lawyer who lives true crime, it drives me crazy. It takes me out of the book
sure.
when someone doesn't do it right. So thank you for that. But my question, it's sort of related to the one that was just asked. When you spoke about the Great Believers, you talked about a moment where you went to Illinois Masonic.
Yeah.
Wrote from what was the AIDS ward and how moving that was for you. Was there anything like that in the process of this book where you went to a place?
Okay, so here's the part that I didn't put together. I said that I was a day student at a boarding school. And I said that I live on campus at the high school where my husband teaches. They're the same school. So, and to be clear, I met my husband on the East Coast. He was not a teacher at my school when I attended the school. But the part that I did not, part of the sentence that I didn't finish was, I have lived at my high school for the past 21 years. So yes. The funny thing is, though, I will say, I've had a nearly continuous experience of that one place. I was gone for college and a few years after, and then I was back. The more relevant experience to me, weirdly, has been revisiting my college campus. I've gone back a few times for readings, and that's a place where I've been gone for 12 years. And then I go back and I go, oh my God, did they move this statue? Because I remember it being over here, but they couldn't have moved it. It weighs 1,000 pounds and it's been here for 200 years. That doesn't make any sense. That kind of disconnect is actually more relevant to that experience. But yes, I do think that the constant kind of palimpsest of like writing over and over and over these experiences on the same place, and knowing the same school from the student side and then the faculty side probably influenced the book in some way. So I'm glad you asked that because I didn't quite get to that part of the story before, and it's very relevant. So thank you. And there was a question right behind you as well, if you want to.
Hi, I was just wondering, could you talk a little bit about your cover? Because I heard an author speak, and she said that when she was first starting off as a writer, the publishers basically said, this is what your cover is going to look like. And she finally got to a point where she had enough power where she said to her publishers, this is what I want on the cover of my novel.
Interesting. So I've had at least veto power and some creative power from the beginning. Something that's really counterintuitive is that the bigger the press, and I'm with Penguin, this is a big press, the more say you have, because they have a giant in-house art department of people who are paid full time. And they'll give you 7 ideas, and if you don't like them, they just go, okay, here are 7 more. Versus a small press that's on a shoestring budget, and they hire a freelancer, and they paid them the money, and this is the one cover. And if you don't like it, they can't afford another one. So I don't know this person's situation, if they went from a smaller press to a larger press. I think also agents in general are getting better at including that in authors' contracts, right of veto power over covers. And also, I do think you just get better at advocating for yourself. So as an author, the first cover, there were just like 1 or 2 things I didn't love, but it was me messaging my agent and being like, can you say that you don't like this part? And she did, because that's what agents are for. But I feel much more like I can just kind of go, I don't. So I will say the first cover they showed us was actually very similar to this, and I liked it a lot. But it was, I could tell it was a younger art director, because this part, instead of being red, was kind of hot pink. And the reasoning was, she was like, well, it was the 90s, so I thought hot pink. I was like, oh, that's a decade off.
Yeah.
And I'm,
I mean, like burnt orange
yeah,
for the 90s. Or like
right.
everyone had like the raisin brown lipstick.
Oh, yeah.
That's
And I'm
the
writing
color.
about kind of grunge kids who are into like Nirvana. The pink was just not, but she thought that said 90s, and I was like, could we go red? But to me, this, I think it is entirely abstract until you maybe realize that it's blood in a swimming pool. So.
I didn't know.
I mean, it doesn't have to be. If you want it to be something else more cheerful, it could be.
No, I love that. Blood in a Swimming Pool is also like a perfect 90s album title.
Yes. That's like the Lost Smashing Pumpkins. Yes.
Hi. I was wondering if you could talk about the emergence of the Jerome plotline.
Yeah.
Because something I really like about how it's handled in the book. At first, it made me really squeamish and like uncomfortable, and then I was like, "Oh, this is Bodhi's perspective very firmly," and that felt very clear to me and not didactic in a way that was, I thought, really graceful.
Thank you.
But that plotline feels like a sort of seed that you haven't quite talked about yet in this conversation. So I was just curious if you could talk about like.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked. We hadn't brought that up at all. So a major part of that's like a subplot. I would say it's a subplot, but it's a big part of the story.
But also like one of the scariest parts of the book.
Right, in a different way.
happens to Bodhi?
Yeah, is that while this character is in New Hampshire for these 2 weeks, her ex-husband basically gets Me Too'd. He is a prominent visual artist, and this woman makes a performance art piece about him. And it's one of those cases where, it's borderline. It's, definitely would depend on your point of view. And I really wanted something where you could absolutely see people coming down on the side of this was skeezy and this guy took advantage of her and we don't want to ever work with him again. And you could definitely see people come down on the side of, wait, it's just an age gap. Is that the issue? Bodhi definitely has a certain point of view on that. One of the reasons, it's not the reason that I put it in there. Like I try everything, and then I need to have I only keep it if it works. So one of the reasons it stayed was that she's in the middle of thinking back with great anger on a lot of things that happened when she was younger, and really, at least mentally holding people to account. And I don't want a book to be all one thing. I want things to contradict themselves, because that's real life, and that's where things really get juicy in a book. And in this case, this would be something where she felt very differently, and she really feels there's a difference. And she's one thing, the book is another thing, I'm another thing, but it's the kind of thing that I would, be curious to eavesdrop on book clubs, how they come down on it. But that's another thing that felt very of the moment to me as I was writing it, not trying to be super contemporary, but it was just on my mind. And these very borderline cases coming up in the literary world, in the art world, in the film world. I started this book in the spring of 19, and then I'm writing about 2018, and it's, I didn't want to shy away from that kind of thinking that would very much be on her mind and on other people's minds in 2018.
Hi, Rebecca. I haven't read your book. I'm eagerly waiting to read the book. But the main character is a film historian, correct?
Yeah.
So, a personal question for Rebecca Makkai. Desert Island, 5 films?
Oh my God, that's impossible. They would probably be 5 films I've never seen. I take these questions way too literally. I'd probably do 5 classics that I've never seen before, because I'm on a desert island.
You don't want to be bored.
I don't want to go with like an old favorite because I've already seen it 7 times. I want to go with something I've never, right? And one of them has got to be like a raft building documentary. And then
Castaway. You're going to have Castaway.
No, Castaway's way too close to home at that point. I don't want to see that. God, I don't. I'm gonna veer. I'm gonna evade the question because I don't think I give you very good answers. But I will sidestep it and give you a slightly different answer, which is to say that I am sadly not nearly as much of a film buff as my character, but researching for her character led me into a lot of amazing films. I watched a couple of just long, multi-part documentaries on film history to figure out exactly what she'd be showing to a class. I had never seen Memento before and watched that for the first time ever because it felt really relevant and also like something she'd be showing her class. So there was a lot of. It's like I want to be a film buff. I just don't have time to be a film buff at this stage in my life. But it led me into some really interesting film history that I wouldn't have otherwise gotten to. So that's how I'm evading the question. Sorry.
Do you have a favorite movie?
Do I have a favorite movie? Oh my God. I don't think I do. Do you?
Yes.
What is it?
Zodiac.
Really? With Mark Ruffalo? Mm-hmm. That one? Mm-hmm. Wow. Why?
It's like a comfort watch for me.
Wow, because it's such a cozy...
My books are available in the lobby if that also hits you right here, then you're my people.
They are brilliant, and she's really that...
this thing, I'm this thing.
She's that. Yeah. No, I mean, I will watch Mark Ruffalo in anything.
Yes.
Right.
Totally.
But wow, Zodiac. I don't know. Are you the only person for whom Zodiac is their favorite film?
Yeah.
You might be it.
I might be it. David Fincher, hit me up.
Mark Ruffalo for a long time was my celebrity, my go-to celebrity crush. Like if someone said, "Who's your celebrity crush?" It was Mark Ruffalo. But in that film,
No.
no.
No one in that film. No one in that film.
Yeah. But you should buy Lindsay's books in the lobby, by the way. And maybe
I have kids. They need to eat.
Yeah.
Let's give it up for Rebecca Makkai.
Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much.